Back in the Devonian, when animals were barely creeping up onto land for the first time, it was the ocean that had the monopoly on monsters. A clade of heavily armored fish dominated the rivers, lakes, and seas, clamping down sharpened razor-blade jaws around anything they could catch. And Dunkleosteus was king of them all. Dunkleosteus was about as close to a prehistoric monster robot fish as you'll ever find. Cold, mechanical, lightning fast. These were the vertebrates' first true apex predators. And despite it living and dying over 350 million years ago, very little has been able to match the power of Dunkleosteus. In this video, we're looking at the original jaws, and stick around because we'll finish up with a note on the new and updated Dunkleosteus phenotype. First, let's set a watery scene. You might not think much of, say, plucking an apple down from a tree and biting into it, but this seemingly simple act relies on a pair of evolutionary adaptations originating around 450 million years ago. Both articulating jaws and backbones were features that show up in placoderms before almost any other animals. Placoderms were heavily armored vertebrates, fish, appearing in fossils from the Silurian and coming into their own during the Devonian, a period also known as the Age of the Fishes. And this is no coincidence, as these armored brutes came to dominate almost every aquatic niche available during this time, and the huge pressure that this put on the animals around them contributed in no small part to the explosion of fish species that we see during the Devonian. By the late Devonian, there were also dorky little examples like Bothriolepis, who used long, spine-like pectoral fins to potter about in the sediment, sucking up detritus from the coastal seabeds. These may have looked a little more like horseshoe crabs and even turtles, at least at the front end, with fish-like tails extending behind them. It's thought that the armored front ends of these animals were an evolutionary response to the previous generation of apex predators, giant sea scorpions. Remember, Dunkleosteus ruled during a time when even arthropods were starting to take their first chances on land, having dominated the oceans for over 100 million years by this point, so placoderms were clearly an upsetting force to the status quo. Placoderms were the first fishes to have pelvic fins, which are appendages that we would eventually thank for giving us legs. They were also some of the earliest vertebrates to have penetrative sex, and perhaps we can thank them for that too, because placoderms were ancestral to all fish groups around today, and that would include the lobe-finned fishes, which encompasses all terrestrial vertebrates, including us. Regardless of how close our relationship is to these animals, placoderms were trendsetters in multiple ways, but the most horrifying and intriguing of these came at the business end of Dunkleosteus. Coming towards the end of the Devonian, placoderms were everywhere. The dominance of the jawless fishes was coming to an end, but these were still very prevalent as well. Sharks were diversifying in this time too, and the sheer number of new and inventive evolutionary strategies in all fish lineages is what gave the period its nickname. This was the turning point for jaws, which likely evolved from gill arches, and from dermal bone in general. The apex predators of the late Devonian had not only armored their heads with it, but also formed very ominous mouths for predating upon other animals. The largest of the marine predators around at this time was also the largest of the placoderms known, Dunkleosteus. Like so many of its kind, it was well armored at the front, but it had a much softer body at the back. Being less armored, these trunks didn't fossilize well, and this means that recreations have still been subject to a lot of speculation, which is something we'll come back to shortly, but for Dunkleosteus, at least, the head gives us plenty to go on. This fish was huge. There are varying estimates of its size and behavior, so we'll start with what was traditionally assumed. The higher estimates for the size of Dunkleosteus place it around 10 meters long and give it a weight of almost 4.5 tons. Its bony head was plated with armor, but most frighteningly, in place of teeth, it had scissor-like jaw bones that sliced over one another, clapping shut like the beak of a snapping turtle, and it did this with an estimated force higher than any other fish known, extinct or not, including the great white. Its brand new jaw was far from primitive and relied on 4 rotational joints and an articulated skull, allowing it to open in as little as 20 milliseconds and complete a full snap in as little as 50. It appears that the snapping motion of the jaw worked similarly to the ratchet mechanism found in animals like the snapjaw ant. Once open, huge muscles could generate tremendous pressure against a locking mechanism until the prey was in reach and the lock would disengage, snapping the heavy jaws closed. but the shape of its head also suggests it could open its mouth very fast too, and therefore it probably used a suction feeding strategy, at least for smaller prey, and that's something we see in modern fish quite a lot as well. The force and power of these bladed jaws was clearly designed to cut and crush hard prey, so it's thought that Dunkleosteus fed on other placoderms and shelled animals like ammonites. Specimens themselves are often found with placoderm bite marks in them, suggesting the age of the fishes was not nearly as relaxing as it sounds. Its massive bulk was held aloft by wide pectoral fins, and its spinal bones extended all the way up into the top tail fin like they do in sharks. This was, until recently, thought to have been a lurking ambush predator. Adult Dunkleosteus gave birth to live young, who engaged in a battle royale form of lethal combat inside the mother, before the strongest and largest emerged alive, ready to start killing other animals too. The young had teeth, which would likely have been worn away as they aged, and gave way to these mechanical snapping bone blades that their parents have. There's even some hint of pigment available in some fossils, and this suggests they were countershaded, with silver bellies and black backs. Far from being ambush predators, it's now becoming obvious that these were open ocean fish, and new recent estimates have changed the way this animal is depicted quite a lot. Before we come to that, here's the quick thank you for taking time to watch this video, and a reminder that your contribution is helping us keep them coming. If you've got any suggestions for animals you'd like us to work on, please leave these in the comments. And if you're enjoying this, please give it a like so that YouTube knows who else to send it to. And as always, subscribe for more. Now, we mentioned that the image of Dunkleosteus has changed over time. This 10-meter monster may not have looked quite how we once thought it had. Much like the notorious Megalodon, Dunkleosteus has undergone a bit of an image change in recent years. And like Megalodon, a massive mouth led to the assumption of a massive body. And in both animals this has recently been contested. Fossils of Dunkleosteus have come almost exclusively from the armoured front end, leaving the back of it a bit of a mystery. And the way researchers estimated what would once have been back there has recently come into question. Firstly, since the upper length estimate of this genus came from allometric relationships between the size of the jaws and the total body length in sharks, there's no telling how accurate they are for totally unrelated fish like placoderms. More recently still, researchers looked instead at some of the smaller members of this clade, whose fossil remains are more complete, and this gave them a more accurate option to base their size estimates upon for Dunkleosteus. They came to the conclusion that placoderms had proportionally much larger mouths than sharks, so Dunkleosteus would not have been nearly as long as we once thought. In 2023, a deeper and wider body plan was proposed, a maximum length of around 4 to 5 meters at most. Using other recent research, including a discovery of fused vertebrae and exceptionally well-preserved fins, an image of a bulky pursuit predator began to emerge, and the elongated ambush predator image was fading. So Dunkleosteus is now looking more like a powerful bluefin tuna, only with hydraulic snapping shears for a face, and still weighing well over a ton. And this goes a long way to counter and overcompensate for any drop in intimidation that we might feel from its reduced size. So, Dunkleosteus wasn't as big as we once thought, but it's hard to say that it was any less frightening, and it held a fascinating position within a group of very ancient fish that roamed the ocean 200 million years before the dinosaurs even emerged. Fish that were perhaps even ancestral to them, as well as to us, as the descendants of that first piscine to pull itself onto land, curiously close to the time Dunkleosteus dominated the waters. And while the dunk has shrunk, this means that there are now other candidates for the largest placoderm, including the scary tooth Gorgonichthys, and possibly the first ever vertebrate filter feeder, Titanichthys. About 359 million years ago, something happened that pulled much of the oxygen out of the oceans, and Dunkleosteus, along with the rest of the placoderms, disappeared suddenly. Interestingly, there's evidence to suggest this may have been caused by a sweeping band of radiation from a local supernova. But that's a story for another time. The placoderms would never terrorize the oceans again, but there was a group of tenacious cephalopods who'd been around for 100 million years by this point, and they would hold their own all the way to the end of the Cretaceous, so if you'd like to hear about some of them, check out our video on Parapazosia next. As for this one, it's all done. Thanks again for watching, and see you next time.